shit. And so the scientists who are working at the cutting edge of the coronavirus, both the epidemiology and the biology and the impacts, are producing science at a very, very rapid rate. And they're just kind of throwing up their papers onto what are called preprint servers, where you can look, and like every day there are hundreds of papers being put on these servers, where you can get a really cutting edge view of what people are doing. Now, the problem with preprints is that you don't know if it's right. And it hasn't been checked, it hasn't been peer reviewed. And so there's some stuff up there that is obviously not going to be correct and is kind of be more confusing than useful. But
like the one that said that the aliens brought the coronavirus. That's a preprint. That
but come on, that's what's wrong with that, Neil? I mean, come on.
It's a hypothesis.
Not yet peer reviewed hypothesis.
Yeah, that's what they want you to believe. So the preprint is kind of like a rough cut screener, basically.
Yeah, no screening. It's a rough cut.
It's just a rough cut. Okay. No, without any screening.
Without any screening. Yeah.
There you go. Okay.
So tell me about one of the things you and your entire institution, as director of GISS, Goddard Institute for Space Studies, relies on is climate modeling.
Yes.
Modeling in general, which is quite a daunting task when the models you create and intended to represent reality have many variables in it. And you have to sort of get a handle on all those variables. Right. Is there any connectivity between modeling climate and modeling the spread of the coronavirus?
And which modeling works best for you? Is it swimwear or evening wear?
You don't want to see me in swimwear. let me tell you. Yes.
Sorry,
I once got caught on Google Street View running through the park like with my shirt off. And it was there for many years. It's like, it was just horrible.
All right, I derailed us. We'll get back on track.
Have you seen? There was a comic or something a few months ago. There was hurricanes coming through. It was a Trump joke. It says something like, Trump wasn't interested in climate change until he heard that the European models were doing better than the American models.
That's pretty funny.
That was definitely funny.
That's damn funny. Yeah. Sorry, but modeling with connection to coronavirus. Sorry, that was a question before I took us down a rabbit hole.
Right. So, let's be clear. Models are absolutely fundamental to the scientific enterprise, right? If you want to make a prediction for something that's going to happen, to be able to test your theories, you have to be able to quantify that. You quantify that using a model. Now, there's different kinds of models. And I think a lot of the conversation related to the coronavirus and the epidemiological models that are being used is that people don't really understand how there are different kinds of models, right? So, there are some models where, you get a bunch of data and basically you just fit a line through it or you fit a curve through it and you say, okay, well, that's what's going to happen. Okay.
But just to be clear, the model is intended to be able to not only predict what will happen in the future, but assess the intensity of what will happen in the future. So right. you put a line through the data that you have and assume that the continuation of that line or curve takes you to where you can now alert authorities.
Right. So, if you're on an exponential growth path, then, you don't want to make a linear extrapolation from that. You want to make an exponential extrapolation, but that only goes so far. And then what happens when you institute some public policy and then really the system has shifted. And so you really need to model that a little bit differently. And so the whole idea is to be able to make predictions so that we can be prepared or more prepared than we currently appear to be. So there's models where basically you're just fitting a line. There are models that are more sophisticated where you're actually trying to track, how a virus goes from one person to another person to another person in what kind of circumstances. And some of that modeling is very complex. Some of it is you have little agents who are kind of infecting each other, and you're trying to aggregate that to the national or the global numbers. That's very, very complicated. The fitting a straight line stuff is very simple. But it turns out that oftentimes you get a good sense of where things are going with the simpler models. But if you actually want to make a useful prediction, you need to do that more complex modeling. And with respect to climate, there's the same kind of thing. You can look at the temperatures over time, and you can put a straight line through it, and you think that that's a prediction. It's not terrible, but it isn't going to tell you what's going to happen the next time there's a volcano, or the next time there's an El Nino event, or the next time that we do something about emissions, right? So
you're saying is you can predict when you have unpredictable things. You can't predict with precision or accuracy when you have unpredictable forces jumping in to mess up your model.
Well, it's hard to know exactly where things are going to go, because the answers from your model are hopefully going to impact public policy, and people are going to make different decisions based on what they think is going to happen, right? So the lockdowns that we've seen, those are in response to models that said, well, if you don't do that, it's going to go up exponentially. And so they said, well, we don't want that, so let's change things. And now that's a new element that, and that's going to give a different answer. So it's not that the models changed, right? But the scenarios have changed,
Okay, so with that in mind, because the important thing, and this is just I'm not the scientist here, I'm listening to this. I want to know, what have you gotten right that I can rely on looking into the future? So can you give us an example of what models you have already executed that said, hey, this is the deal and we got it right, or even more importantly, we were way too conservative?
Right. So going back to my field, right, where I know more of that kind of stuff. So in climate, we started seriously looking at the carbon dioxide problem in the 1960s. And people made predictions then that said, okay, well, by the end of the century, we'll have warmed up by about 1 degree Celsius. And we did. But it wasn't just like, it was going to get warmer. It was quite precise. And then they said, well, okay, but up in the stratosphere, which is the part of the atmosphere above the weather, they said, well, actually, something weird is going to happen there. It's going to get colder. And it turns out that happened as well. And then they said, well, the water vapor is going to go up. And they said, well, that happened too. And all of these things that we predicted, the increase of heat in the ocean, we predicted that at the rate at which it's actually warming up.
Well, this is all good.
But Chuck, it means they're bad. Okay?
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. So my point is this. What are you guys doing wrong that nobody gives a shit that you got all this stuff right?
Right. That's a social issue that has to be solved.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just a quick thing for the Celsius illiterate Americans. You said the temperature would go up by 1 degree Celsius. 1 degree Celsius, if I remember my math, equals 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, it's about 2. You don't need to worry about the decimal position. Yeah. But yeah, I mean that's how much we're doing.
So I just want to go ahead and bring this segment to a fast close, because we got more of the show on continuing the topic with yet another guest. So just to be clear, the fact that there is a virus pandemic is not itself of interest to you, climate scientists. What's of interest to you is the effect that pandemic has had on our consumption of fossil fuels, and how that then affects your climate model.
Well, I'm pretty interested in what's happening with the virus just as a basic human being. I'm not purely a scientist.
Good to know you're a human being. Thank you for
yes. But yeah, no, I mean, wearing my climate scientist hat, I'm very interested in how this is impacting air quality, radiation, temperatures going forward, carbon dioxide going forward. Yeah, and we're diving into that.
In much the same way, after September 11th, we had weeks of no air traffic. And so I remember reading the astronaut accounts for that they no longer could see the contrails crisscrossing the country and the world over that period of time.
It's a great example that you brought up there, because in that period it was the air traffic was only down for a few weeks, and that wasn't really enough to kind of pull out the signal that's from the contrails, what they do to the climate, to kind of disentangle that from just the weather. But like this situation that we have here is going to be longer and more long-lasting, and I think we will in fact get an answer to that same question.
This will help your models become more accurate.
Yes, it's a pretty high price to pay for a few improvements in a model, but yes, we will use it.
Well, Gavin, great to have you back on Star Talk. You're just up the street. We want to make sure you stay within arm's reach of us, because we'll surely find
6 feet away. 6 feet away.
We'll find or invent some excuse to get you back on.
Great.
All right, when we come back to Star Talk, we're going to have a chat with climate scientist Catherine Hayhoe on that next segment. Edition of Star Talk is any connection at all between the coronavirus and climate change. Yeah. And so for this segment, we're bringing in a new expert, a new guest, and this is going to be Catherine Hayhoe. Catherine, did I pronounce your name correctly?
You did.
Hayhoe. Hayhoe, Catherine.
Catherine is a living embodiment of a Naughty by Nature song.
Oh, is that right?
That's right. Hip hop hooray! Ho! Hey! Ho! Okay, enough.
Also Ramones. Hey ho, here we go.
Oh, hey!
And
ho! Let's go!
Exactly.
All right.
And Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
That's hi ho, not hey ho.
Oh.
Well, you can say it hey ho. Off to work we go.
No, not that. No, we're stopping there. No.
Okay.
So, Catherine, you are director of the Texas Tech Climate Center, and in that capacity, you also serve as professor at Texas Tech. And what department are you?
Well, I have had a varied career. My undergraduate degree is in astrophysics.
Nice.
My master's and PhD is in atmospheric science, and I am currently in the political science department at Texas Tech because climate change is the most political science there is.
Oh,
that's for sure.
Don't tell me that. I don't want to hear that. No.
Yeah.
Well, tell me now, why are we talking to you about the coronavirus?
We are really concerned right now, obviously, about the impact of this pandemic on our world. But the reason why we're concerned is because it affects our health, our welfare, and the economy of our families, our loved ones, our communities, our cities, our countries. And that is exactly what climate change affects too, just over a longer time scale.
So this is like a microcosm of what it's a disaster reel playing out in fast motion, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It is playing out in a matter of days, whereas climate change plays out in years to decades. But in terms of where we are with climate change, we are as if we were in the second week of March on the coronavirus pandemic, in terms of how far we've already progressed and how great and how imminent the risk is that we face today.
So tell me about ecosystems and the spread of the coronavirus, or the existence of the coronavirus in the first place, or any virus, especially species-jumping viruses. How is that all interconnected?
So coronavirus came to humans through a process called zoonosis. That means it jumped from animals to humans.
Wait, that's a word?
Yes, zoonosis is absolutely a word. So it is not a happy event, it's just the opposite. It is where a virus that already exists in an animal population jumps over to humans, and we have no immunity to it, and we are incredibly vulnerable. So the fact that it jumped over to humans is primarily due to the fact that animals like pangolins were being sold in wildlife markets.
What kind of animal is that?
It's like an armadillo, almost. It's like a kind of a really armored-looking little animal, like an armadillo, that nobody should be eating.
And what's it called?
Pangolin.
Oh, okay. For a moment, I thought you were saying penguins, and I was going to say, Catherine, I know you're a scientist, but I think you're mistaken.
I don't think you should be eating penguins either.
Okay, continue. Yes.
But we know that, first of all, as human expansion shrinks wildlife areas and fragments ecosystems, humans are coming into more and more contact with animal populations that have nowhere to go. And then as climate change is changing where different types of vegetation grow, where different animal species live, increasing the risk of droughts that wipe out food supply, that's also making animals more desperate and more likely to engage with humans in their search for food, which puts us additionally at risk from getting more of these diseases, making that jump from animals over to humans.
Wait, Catherine, you're freaking me out at this moment. What you're saying is, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so you correct me if I'm wrong, that the coronavirus is just one example of what will continue to happen going forward as we displace ecosystems.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's our show, people. Thank you so much.
Moving along.
So, Catherine, tell me about what roles governments, will governments learn something from the coronavirus that they can then apply to staving off climate change?
Come on, Neil. I'm supposed to be doing the comedy. Come on, man. Trying to put me out of a job? What is happening?
All right.
Let me just say, one would hope so. And one would hope that the basic lesson they would learn is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This is not, forgive me for saying this, rocket science. It is just understanding that a stitch in time saves 9. Preparing for and preventing future risk is a lot safer and more affordable than waiting for the tsunami to roll over your head and then trying to survive it.
Can you talk about the fact that food insecurity is a big deal right now because of coronavirus, and food insecurity with respect to climate, because that's when things get really real. When people can't eat, that's when the proverbial S hits the fan.
Well, I'll tell you that going all the way back to when I decided that I had to do my best to study climate change instead of astrophysics, what stabbed me in the heart, what made me really change my mind on what to do with my life, was when I found out that the poorest people in the world were the ones who were most affected by a changing climate. And we are seeing that play out here today. Let me give you a couple of examples. So first of all, I was talking to colleagues who live around the world, and they were saying, people who live in poor countries, the middle-class people are sitting in their air-conditioned homes with the groceries they ordered online and Netflix and internet, and poor people can't go out to get jobs to support their families, and they're even beat up and arrested if they do go out because of the quarantines, but they can't even feed their families. Here in the United States, we are seeing that African-American populations are being disproportionately affected by this disease. We don't know for sure, but I suspect it's what we're seeing around the world. People who already live in areas with very poor air quality, which is primarily due to burning fossil fuels, which is what causes climate change, those people are much more vulnerable. A study they did on SARS like 15 years ago showed that if you caught SARS and you lived in an area with very dirty air, you were twice as likely to die from it as if you lived in a place with clean air. And so we know that that is the case in the US today. And then there's the issue of, like you just said, food shortages and food security. The more well-off and affluent we are, the better insulated we are, at least for the first few months, from the impacts of pandemics, from climate change, from disasters. It is always the poorest and the most vulnerable who suffer first.
Right, so you're in a department of political science. So these are people who presumably care what you say, because you're coming to them from an entire scientific foundation of an understanding of the past, present, and future of nature and our intersection with it. So what kind of an audience do you have?
I would say that many of the political scientists I've spoken with are even more worried about this than climate scientists, if you can imagine.
Good.
Yes, because they know that one of the first things to go as disasters build up in the world, one of the first things to go are democratic
Still there.
systems.
Clear on the right.
That's ugly.
Ooh, that's scary.
Yeah, that is scary.
Right side.
I mean, it
Clear
becomes
on the
more
right.
totalitarian.
People are willing to cede more control to a leader in a time of disaster.
When we come back to Star Talk, more on the coronavirus and its other similarities to climate change.
Car right. Clear.
Hey, we'd like to give a Patreon shout out to following Patreon patrons: Taylor Brandt and Carlene Goodbody. You know, Carlene, in my younger days, I was also Thanks, guys, for helping us make our way across the cosmos, because without you, we couldn't do it. And for those of you listening who would like your very own Patreon
Thanks, Carl.
shout out, go to patreon.com/StarTalkRadio and support us.
I bet it's because I forgot to enable.
We're back. Star Talk. In the coronavirus, keeping our distances.
Forgot to re-enable
physical distances,
my.
but we are totally in each other's face
There it
electronically.
goes.
Ain't that right? I've got with me some extra expertise in the guys of Catherine Hayhoe. Welcome back to Star Talk in this segment. And just to remind people, she's director of the Texas Tech Climate Center. Very cool. And
Awesome.
she has an ear.
I always disable it, like
She has
if
the
I
ear of
take the headset off and then I always forget to enable it again when I start driving,
care about
and it's
things that
boring.
could disrupt the apple cart of politics, when they call it that. So, let me ask you, Catherine. Can you tell me about any similarities you see about people's attitudes towards climate change, plus or minus, and attitudes towards this COVID-19 coronavirus?
Absolutely. So for a long time, we've known here in the U.S. and sadly increasingly in other countries around the world, at home of Canada, the UK, Australia, and more, that the number one predictor of whether we agree with over 100 years of science that tells us that digging up and burning coal, gas, and oil is wrapping an extra blanket around the planet. It's causing it to warm. The number one predictor of whether we agree with those facts is not how smart we are, it's not how much science we know, it's not how educated we are. It is simply where we fall on the political spectrum. And today we see that the further to the right we are on the political spectrum in the United States, the more likely we are to dismiss the risks posed by the coronavirus pandemic as well.
So,
Why?
wait, so does one cause the other, or the other cause the other? I mean,
They're both symptoms of the underlying cause. The underlying
so there's a third underlying cause.
I think the underlying cause is fear. It's fear that the world is just changing too quickly, that people who have sort of been at the top of the heap for a long time are feeling like they're being shoved to the back of the line, and that anything that talks about change, whether it's immigration, whether it's government solutions, whether it's clean energy,
I'm trying
we've
to
been using
get
coal
a
since
stent
the Middle
in
Ages. What's wrong with it? Anything
before I
that's
just go
new
jumping into
is
this
seen
race
as a
later.
threat to the established status quo.
So,
And I
when you
don't
say
feel real
fear,
comfortable
you
right
mean
now, so
fear of the consequences of climate change.
it's getting late.
Virus. You mean fear of a change in their sociopolitical status.
Absolutely.
So you will resist. See, so why don't, let me just ask you. If I don't want my status to change, why don't I just declare I don't want to make these changes? I see the science, I agree with the science, I don't want to change policy based on it. Why don't we just do that?
That would be the honest thing to do. And some people actually do that. But a lot of people, our self-defense mechanisms kick in. 99.9% of the climate denial I see is actually solution aversion. But the solution aversion will arrive cloaked in either a sciencey or religiously sounding smokescreen. In other words, it's just a natural cycle. It's the sun. God is in control. But when you dig down, anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute, on their own initiative, people will say, well, I don't want to fix this problem because it means government control. I can't drive my truck. I can't do my job. China's going to take over the world. But our psychology comes into play, because if I say it's a real problem and it will hurt the poorest people in the world, but I don't want to fix it, that makes me the bad guy. And none of us want to be the bad guy. We want to be the good person. And so we throw up this defense mechanism to explain why we are good and smart in rejecting this problem.
Well, even if we're not good, we'd at least be neutral to it.
Yeah.
Right.
So are you trying to tell me that if I don't give a damn about poor people, that I'm a bad person, Catherine? Because I got to tell you the truth, I don't give a damn about poor people. I'm just saying.
If you
all of my friends are rich, Catherine. I'm just letting you know right now.
I've got some things your friends could do with their money in that case.
All right, so let me dig into that a little deeper. So what about those who are conspiracy prone?
Mm-hmm.
And you get some of those in every big scientific political issue. Mm-hmm. Even every science issue, just whether we landed on the moon, whether the Earth is flat or round. And so have you seen any similarities between the pandemic and climate change with regard to just claims of...
I looked down for 1 second.
Yes.
And I hit a curb.
In fact, some of the very same organizations that regularly spread conspiracy theories about climate change have been spreading conspiracy theories about the pandemic as well.
Oh my goodness.
So it's conspiracy central then?
It is. And one of my colleagues, Steve Lewandowski, he's a cognitive psychologist at the University of Bristol in the UK.
That's my favorite kind of psychologist, by the way.
Yeah, yes, he's great. So Steve has studied conspiracy theories in general, everything from the Queen killed Princess Diana to there's this international cabal of scientists that have been controlling climate for 200 years. And he showed that they're all part and parcel of the same mindset.
With my weather machine, I is to one day rule the world.
It's an episode of Family Guy where Stewie takes his little weather machine and he actually succeeds in doing just that. So where do we go from here? What's your advice? I mean, I like the fact that you're at this nexus of the science and the politics and the pop culture. Something that we know, if any real solution has to be put into effect, it's got to influence politics. It's got to influence people's hearts and minds. So, I'm reminded of when everyone was hauling whales out of the ocean because they're really useful. The whale blubber is useful for light and fuel oil. And
God, those are crazy.
Oh wait, and then there are people who didn't want to kill these big beautiful creatures. And then we stopped killing the big, beautiful creatures. Is it because of this movement? No, it's because we found oil in the ground and didn't need the whales. And your life was not at risk pulling oil out of the ground compared to whaling vessels. So maybe you're not going to convince people's hearts and minds, Catherine. You have to come up with an economic solution that everybody can embrace, and then people will just do it. So where are we now?
I'm going to be totally honest. So first of all, I'm not an economist, but I listen to economists. And nearly every economist in the world, including the two who won the Nobel Prize a year and a half ago, agree that the most effective way to start cutting carbon emissions is to restore the massive imbalance between the cost of fossil fuels and clean energy. Most people think that clean energy is massively subsidized when fossil fuels aren't, and it's exactly the opposite. Direct subsidies on fossil fuels in the U.S. are about double the subsidies on renewables. And if you include the indirect subsidies from the air pollution from 200,000 deaths in the U.S. alone every year from the air pollution from fossil fuels, if you include the indirect, the subsidies to fossil fuels exceed the Pentagon's budget. So a price on carbon would restore the balance so that we would see that actually clean energy is much cheaper. And even with this imbalanced system, wind is already cheaper, the whole middle of the country for electricity, and solar is already cheaper in the Southwest than natural gas or coal.
Tell me about the CO2 we're not putting in the atmosphere now relative to any long-term climate goals?
Yes. So under the Paris Agreement, pretty much every country in the world agreed to try to limit global warming to 2 degrees C, noting that we're already at 1 degree C.
The C is Celsius. Confirm that. Okay.
Or technically Kelvin.
Yeah, it's just a degree range. Right?
Yes. So 2 degrees Celsius, or 1.5 if we could. Because there's no magic number, like if we end up at 1.5, we'll be totally fine, and 1.6 will be totally screwed. It's like cigarettes. The more cigarettes you smoke, the worse it is. So if we want to end up at 1.5 degrees, then one way to get there is to cut our carbon emissions pretty quickly. We need about a 40% cut by 2030, and we need a 100% cut by about the middle of the century. And that sounds like astronomical in terms of human emissions. But here's the thing.
Wait, just I back up for a second. So the target is 1.5 degrees Celsius over how much time?
To stabilize it at 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century.
Oh, so what you're saying is, whatever more we warm the Earth, don't warm it more than by 1.5 degrees.
Right. So we're already kind of up to here. Do we kind of plateau, or do we just keep on going up?
Got it.
But isn't it true that, let's say we were to make those targets, right, and make them right when we're supposed to, that there is, much like the economy, climate has a lag time, so we're still going to see increases in, the warming.
That's absolutely true, and that's why after mid-century, we'd have to start sucking this stuff back out of the atmosphere.
So we have to reduce, and then we actually have to extract.
Yes, and that extracting can be done in some very low-tech ways. Planting trees is one way to do it. But there's also some really cool high-tech ways. If a couple of really smart companies have figured out how to suck carbon out of the atmosphere, and they can turn it into liquid fuel.
Okay, now you're just making stuff up.
I just want to refocus this. So, if we promise to asymptotically get to 1.5 degrees, it's still the matter of all the CO2 that's in the ocean is dissolved, right? That'll still keep coming out, which is why you were saying we have to keep extracting it out of the air. Is that correct?
Yes, so the ocean can get back in balance with the atmosphere. So it sounds like a big number, but here's the thing. If you look at how we've reduced our carbon emissions due to the pandemic in just a few weeks.
Not on purpose.
Not on purpose.
Just to be clear.
No, and not sustainably. We couldn't sustain a reduction due to shutting down the economy and throwing people out of work, and that is fact. But if we had achieved it through increases in efficiency, through clean energy, and through drawing down carbon, we would be a quarter of the way to meeting our Paris Agreement targets in just a few weeks.
Wow. I mean, that's encouraging, though.
Yeah. It shows that if the threat is actually staring us in the eyeballs, it shows that we can do it. But the problem is this. As you yourself just said, Neil, it's a time frame issue. Climate change unrolls in slow motion. And I'm really afraid as a scientist that by the time we get to the point when disaster is staring every single human in the eye, it's going to be too late to act.
Let me ask you a final question. We're running out of time. What, forgive me for borrowing a medical term here, what advice do you give people to inoculate themselves against bad science?
Oh, I see what you did there.
When it comes to not only climate change, but also the coronavirus.
Well, so inoculation is really important because we live in a world today where somebody thinks that if they can Google something, they know more than the experts. And so inoculating ourselves against fake news is something I do with my students. I take my students through things and I say, if something sounds too extreme or too good to be true, it probably is. If something was said by Dr. So-and-so, Google Dr. So-and-so. Do they actually have expertise in what they're talking about or not? Take everything with a grain of salt, depending on what media outlet you're getting it from, because we know that certain ones skew more left, others skew more right, and then you have ones that are extremely factual, like Star Talk, of course, as well as like, the BBC and the CBC, kind of national news networks in Canada and the UK that have to just stick to the facts. But I think that really being aware that just because something is on the internet doesn't mean it's real. Just because a politician said something doesn't mean it's real. I think that's really key to learning or to starting our journey towards inoculating ourselves.
Can you tell me if there's a way to fact check or Google the source a lot of people say, or many people say? Is there a way that we can confirm that?
Oh, yes. So I direct people to Snopes all the time. Snopes fact checks all the little statements that people
when in doubt, go to Snopes.com.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
I'm in the dark here, guys. What is Snopes?
But Chuck...
I'm serious. What is Snopes?
Okay, Snopes checks anything that you might even be a little suspicious of the authenticity of its content or of its origin.
Oh, that's why I don't know it. That's what I got you for, Neil.
So there's an organization called Climate Feedback, and what they do is they've gotten climate scientists together to peer review news articles, and they give the news articles a rating of truthfulness. So any news article that cites a politician or an organization, they actually have it peer reviewed on Climate Feedback.
Wow. And what website is that?
climatefeedback.org.
Nice. Okay. I'm going there tonight. Catherine, we gotta end this. Give us one last bit of wisdom that you can share with the Star Talk universe.
I think the pandemic has taught us all that no matter who we are, no matter what country we live in, no matter what language we speak, no matter where we fall on the political spectrum, when it all comes down to it, what really matters to all of us is the health and the well-being of our family, our loved ones, our friends, our community, and more. That's exactly why we care about climate change too, and that's why no matter who we are, no matter where we live, no matter what language we speak, no matter what part of the political spectrum we're on, we are already the perfect person to care about climate change because we're a human who lives on this earth.
Yeah.
That's a mic drop. That's a mic drop.
Catherine, hey ho. Love having you on here. We want to get you again.
Anytime.
This is great. We will definitely find a way we'll invent an excuse to bring you back on. Free people. Thanks, and regards to your family. Stay safe, stay warm, stay fed, and keep trying to change the world.
You too, Neil. Thank you.
All right, Chuck, always good having you.
Always a pleasure, Neil.
All right, this has been Star Talk in the Coronaverse, a special installment on the coronavirus versus climate change. We didn't think we could do that, but we did. I've been your host, Neil deGrasse Tyson, your personal astrophysicist. As always, loving you.
Turn your great idea into a reality with Squarespace. You have great ideas, don't you? Well, Squarespace makes it easier than ever to launch your passion project, whether you're showcasing or selling products of your company. With beautiful templates and the ability to customize just about anything, you can easily make a beautiful website yourself.
You've got about 5 laps of fuel.
Get stuck. Squarespace's 24/7 award-winning customer support is there to help. Head to squarespace.com/StarTalk for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code StarTalk to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Welcome to Star Talk, your place in the universe where science and pop culture collide. Star Talk begins right now. This is Star Talk. I'm your host, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I got with me Chuck Nice. Chuck! Chuck in the house. All right. This is a cosmic edition. And we're celebrating 30 years. Yeah, 30 was launched in 1990, April.
Look at that.
Yeah. And we're talking across someone right here.
I know.
He's
So rude of us.
So rude.
Very rude of us. Edwin would be ashamed.
So we have Jennifer Rice. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you.
I think you're your first time visiting.
It's
here.
wonderful.
We go way back, but your first time, so it's long overdue. And I got your pedigree here, senior project scientist for the Hubble Space Telescope at the NASA Goddard
What's the full Goddard?
Space Flight Center.
Goddard's because we have a Goddard here. That's why
Oh,
it's
exactly.
Space Studies.
Yeah, we have a Goddard Institute for Space. Goddard.
Goddard.
Yeah, rockets. We got it. So the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland.
Correct.
Right outside of Washington, D.C. And you're primarily responsible for making sure Hubble is as scientific as possible.
Wow.
And sure enough, that's what it has been. We're going to get into that.
Yeah.
And you're professionally, what would you say is your cosmic specialty?
I'm interested in how stars continue to form in interstellar clouds. So,
All those pictures from Hubble with the stuff with the clouds,
Yes.
that's her.
Nice.
well, that's not all.
She took it personally.
Not exactly.
She owns them all.
She owns all those pictures. This is called inflation, in some way. No, there are people all over the world studying different aspects of how stars and planetary systems around them, presumably, are continuing to form.
So, but it's you're in the right place to be fed.
Absolutely.
Continually.
We're just we're blessed to be fed with all this new information from the Hubble Space Telescope, and also telescopes, all kinds of other telescopes in space and on the ground. We use them all together in complementary fashion.
So you kind of layer the information, put it together, dare I say it, better picture.
Exactly. I think of it like a symphony orchestra. The conductor's pulling out some parts of the music from the trumpets and some from the percussion and some from the violins and so forth, but all together it gives you the full piece of music. So astronomers use some information from the Hubble Space Telescope, some from other space telescopes, some from telescopes on the ground. They all have some different niche. You know, they get some different colors or parts of the wavelength spectrum or a different types of fields of view and precision, and we use all that together to answer the questions we have about galaxies or stars or planets or whatever we're interested in.
So tell me, you don't just happen to be at the Goddard Space Flight Center. That's where Hubble is controlled.
The Hubble Space Telescope Control Room is, yes, at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center.
Then what's that Hubble building on the campus of Johns Hopkins?
At Johns Hopkins, we have the Space Telescope Science Institute, which is a wonderful place with hundreds of scientists and other specialists who work with us at Goddard to help us manage the daily science operations at Hubble, to help with the selections of which proposals that are sent in from around the world actually get the time on the Hubble
I
telescope.
don't think people think much about that. They,
Right,
the
God.
data just show up.
Clear.
Right? But somebody had
Somebody had to do an American Idol version of, yo, I need Hubble. That's the next big show coming to Fox.
Yes.
Yo, I need Hubble.
show me your proposal, right?
That's a really good analogy, but it's not done quite the way it's done in terms of the TV shows. What's done is that scientists around the world will write a written proposal for why they want to use the Hubble Space Telescope. Why are the observations they want to do so important to advance science, and why do they need the Hubble Space Telescope to do that?
As opposed to any other telescope
Exactly.
that they could be applying for time.
Right.
Because you don't want to waste. I think this is true for the allocation committee. They're not going to give you time for a proposal that you could do on a ground-based telescope, because space-based telescopes are so expensive and so precious every moment you're observing time. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have to make the case, why is it important that we use this precious time with the Hubble telescope to observe this particular galaxy or this particular exoplanetary system? And why do we need the Hubble telescope or the particular instruments that are on Hubble to do that? And that goes through a pretty stringent peer review process where specialists come in and review all the proposals and rank them, and in the end, basically 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 get time on the Hubble Space Telescope.
What's it like on American Idol?
I think a little less than that.
So you're better off applying for Hubble time than winning American Idol.
Actually, you're probably not.
Although I should add that we're pretty good about storing this data. So once the observations are done with Hubble, the data are put in an archive that's easily accessible. And so scientists around the world often go into that archive, pull out data that's already there, but they can use it for something else. And in fact, about half of the results, the peer-reviewed, published science discoveries and results coming from Hubble now, are based on data that scientists have taken out of that archive.
So if you use the telescope, then everything that you glean from using it is now open source.
Well, it's better than that, I think.
Is it better?
No, because I had my own motives
Right.
for observing that part of the sky.
Right.
But maybe you have another thing you could extract from the data that I haven't thought of yet.
That's
Right?
Exactly. That's
Right.
So
But there is nothing proprietary.
well, there is for some types of observations.
Now that's all I care about is who gets the proprietary stuff.
There are some types of proposals where the proposing team get a few months.
Jennifer's got to play. This is my cluster.
Right.
This is my.
No, nobody owns anything in the universe personally, but
Not yet, but go on.
Some of the proposals, the proposing team gets a few months of time to do what they actually propose to do and do it well, because we want them to have the time to do it well. And then the data gets put in this archive, and then it's open to everyone. And there are other types of observations that are generally done, like big surveys and things that let's say the director of the Space Telescope Science Institute decides would be a good general purpose use of Hubble, and that data immediately goes into public purview, so it can be immediately used by scientists around the world, but anybody in the public can reach the archive. We also have an image gallery that I think is probably of more interest to most general people in the science-interested public, and that you can find at
Car ride,
websites,
clear on the right.
NASA.gov/Hubble or HubbleSite.org. But these have the images, the things that you really think
Right
about
side,
when you think
clear
of
on the
Hubble's
right.
galaxies.
Car
and
ride,
Your
nebulae.
desktop
clear.
screensaver.
Yeah, exactly. That's where you go, and that's just all free to anyone around the world to use and enjoy. And that's something I'm very proud of about the Hubble mission, is that we've made all of this data and all of these images free for anyone around the world to use.
Shutterstock hates
Well, it's inspiring to everyone.
No, it is.
Before we get to the questions, I got one more inquiry here. So, is it still true that the director can just say, "Here's a good idea. Everyone will benefit. Let's just do this. It's not going through the telescope allocation committee." Okay, so it's a director's discretionary time. Does that still exist?
It does. So that the director of the Space Telescope Science Institute, who currently is Dr. Kenneth Simbach, has a certain allocation of time with Hubble each year that they can use for what they think is the most some scientific purpose that might not come through sort of the general competitive process with scientists around the world. And usually this time is used for, let's say, a kind of big survey or a general purpose observation that will be of use to people for many years to come.
Could it be used for something that's a little quirky?
Well, let me tell you.
A little quirky.